Well, just to be mindful of our time today, let's go ahead and get started. I just want to welcome everybody. Thank you for taking the time and joining us for this webinar session that is brought to you in partnership with the OUNS. My name is Fernando and I'm with the Region 9 Head Start Association, and I'm excited to be your webinar host today. So feel free to contact me via the chat box in Zoom. With any logistical questions you may have today regarding audio, video, or any connection issues. Please note that as a registered attendee, you will have the ability to log out and log back in if you need to restore your connection with the same credentials you received when you're registered. If you have any questions or experience any issues during this troubleshooting process, I will put in an email in the chat box throughout the session today, where you can send us your questions, try to connect with us, and we'll help you to gain access to your session. This webinar session will be recorded and will be made available to all registered participants next week. You will find the copy of the recording up on our YouTube channel, which you can access via our website. A follow-up email will go out to all participants at the conclusion of the live session containing the certificate of participation. If you're wondering if you're receiving that, an email will come out with an attachment with your certificate as soon as the session ends. If you have any clarifying questions in or comments for our speakers today, please use the Q&A box to submit those to us, and we'll try our very best to address them live, since we have limited time for the content that we have prepared for you today. During today's session, there will also be some additional opportunities for interaction that will happen via the chat box. So stay tuned for that to submit any comments or questions that the speakers are requesting for you via the chat box. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our topic for today, essential conditions for successful early childhood professionals. And our speakers today will be Kelly Woodlock, Deborah Pacquiano, and Ariel Chaides. And I thank you again for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the presentation. Take it away.
Great. Thank you, Fernando. Hello and welcome to Essential Conditions for Successful Early Childhood Professionals. I am Kelly Woodlock, one of the facilitators of this session, along with my colleagues Deborah Pacquiano and Ariel Chaides. We will do a little bit more introduction here in just a minute, but we just wanted to acknowledge that we wouldn't be here today if you weren't invested in quality programs for children and families and in your role as a leader. Whether you're in a classroom, a center, or a home visiting program, strong leadership can greatly influence the environmental and field conditions for successful programs, and we are honored that you have chosen to spend your time with us today. Before we get started, I see that a few folks are putting their names into the chat. We would love to know who's with us today, so if you haven't already, please enter your name, your location, and your role into the chat. We would love to see who's with us. Oops. Oh, looks like we have folks from California, Arizona. We've got a great turnout. LA, Oahu, wow. So great, Pennsylvania. It's really great to have everybody with us. We'll keep looking and really be curious about who's with us in this learning session. Ariel, if you would mind advancing the slide. Okay, so now that we know a little bit about who's here, oh, this is great, Kansas, my home state. It's great. Now that we are seeing who's with us today, I just want to give you a quick overview of our objectives for this session. We will spend our time in these three areas. First, we'll talk a little bit about examining the current field conditions that impact successful staff retention and professional development of early childhood practitioners. Next, we'll look at identifying program level climate and conditions that create optimal environment for the support of early child professionals. And then last but not least, we will explore best practices in supervision and professional development that build professional competencies and confidence in practice. Both are critically important. We will provide a context and examples relevant for center-based and home visiting programs, with much of what we discussed today being applicable to either or both settings. And we may use the terms professional and practitioner interchangeably. So I just want to lay that out there. All right. Next slide, please. And now we'll do some quick round of introductions. As I said earlier, my name is Kelly Woodlock. I am the Vice President of National Home Visiting at the Ounce of Prevention Fund. And I've spent the last 30 or so years focused on the field of home visiting in one capacity or another. But my professional life started as a home visitor. And that remains to this day my most transformative and formative experience in my career. What I've learned from families and from other home visitors and supervisors has been critical in shaping my path. So that's a little bit about me. Deborah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everybody. Deborah Pacquiano. If you know Italian, 2 C's with an H is a K sound. But my family, which were immigrants, they thought they'd Americanize it and making the ch sound. So to either. My background, I'm the first person to this day in my family who has gone on to college. And what really, my background is in educational psychology, and my whole reason for being is to really try to humanize the process of teaching and learning and who the adults are to each other in that incredible work. So for me, I consider myself to be a practitioner, since I'm not a classroom teacher or I'm not a home visitor. But I also put all of those people under that same bucket of professional practitioners in early childhood. So I'm thrilled to be here with you today and to share in this conversation.
Wonderful, and welcome everybody. My name is Ariel Chaidez. I'm a senior program manager at the Ounce of Prevention Fund. I've been here at the Ounce for around 13 years, and actually started my journey at the Ounce when my wife was expecting our first child. So I felt like I've grown along with early childhood as I've continued my profession. I work with a dynamic team and a dynamic division, a wonderful organization, but supporting a lot of home visiting and center-based programs across the state of Illinois. I'm also a Parents to Teachers National Trainer. I know there's a lot of partnerships with PAT across Head Start and Early Head Start. But I've had a lot of working experience with healthy families, doula programs, Early Head Start, as well as Parents to Teachers. Before the Ounce, after grad school, I actually worked 5 years with kids in juvenile detention and their families doing home visits. A lot of the work that was to really support them to get integrated back into the schools and into their communities. And it was a lot of hard work. It was difficult work. There wasn't always a lot of success once kids are a little bit older to make impactful change, which is really why early childhood is so amazing, because it really is that prevention work that research has shown makes so much impact. And I'm really pleased that all of you who are here in our session and in our seminar come from that background, have been in that background, because you guys are the agents of change. So I look forward to sharing a little bit more in my session, but thank you all for being here.
Great, thank you, Deborah and Ariel. We want to tell you just a little bit about our organization, and then we'll launch into our presentation. So Ariel, if you wouldn't mind advancing the slide. We, as we all stated, we're from the Ounce of Prevention Fund. And as you can see from the slide, the Ounce is a nonprofit organization that focuses on advocating for parents and young children across the country. We really strive to ensure that children have the support systems, healthy relationships, advocates necessary to have and receive quality early learning experiences that set them up for success now and in the future. At the Ounce, we really use a trilingual lens of program, policy, and research to influence improvement of state and local preschool programs, as well as home visiting programs. And we also incorporate professional development for center-based and home visiting professionals as a core element of our work. All right, next slide. We use the cycle of feedback loops at the Ounce between the policy, practice, and research to influence change and transform systems. Knowing that it takes both grassroots to tips and tips to roots to make it happen. It requires provider and parent voice and really an openness to learn and change. Okay, next slide, Ariel. Thank you. So in this first part of the session, I'm going to walk you through our first objective. in which we will examine the current conditions, field conditions that impact successful professional development and staff retention. So what we really want to talk about is, taking this deeper dive into conditions that impact that retention, and to think with you about this. We know that early childhood professionals enter the field with a passion, like we all did, for the importance of their role in making a difference for parents, for children, so what happens that we have a workforce turnover rate that is increasingly high? So let's just start with the first question on the slide. And we'd love to have your feedback. We will share some ideas throughout this session, but we would love to hear your voice as well. So this first session, which field conditions contribute to practitioner decisions to leave versus to stay in their position? What are you seeing in the field as leaders? What are some of the things that come up for you in your day-to-day work? So I'll pause here and see if we can get some feedback in the chat. Pay, I see. Salary is a big one. Flexibility. Leadership support, very critical, very critical. We'll keep putting your notes in, and we'll keep moving forward. As I said, we would like to share some of our thoughts on this as well, but you are really hitting the mark and really in alignment with what we have seen as well. Growth in the organization, work environment, absolutely. All right. Some of the current field conditions that influence retention are listed on this slide, and obviously through the chat, these will be no surprise to you. Increased attention is being paid to how expensive the issue of turnover is. And when I say expensive, not just only in terms of money, but in the outcomes of children and families. Because if we can't keep our workforce engaged, how do we expect to keep families engaged and involved in services? Just even long enough to, support and achieve outcomes. We need to better understand the dynamics of the challenge to do what is needed to improve the conditions to support long-term engagement of the workforce. So out of the things that we've seen in the chat, are there others that resonate with you? Things that you are seeing in your program that really influence retention in the field beyond any other last comments in the chat before we move on? We do think that systems and organization areas of influence, including the siloed funding aspects, the inequitable salaries, opportunities or lack of opportunities for advancement can be issues that really do hinder the process of staff retention, as well as leading to family retention. Great. Okay. Let's look on the flip side. We've got a lot of things that cause barriers, but we really also want to think about some of the opportunities to support retention, because there are home visitors and early child professionals that do stay in their roles and really find what they need. We really think about this through those areas of creating collaborations in professional development. Are there organizations in your communities or in your states that work together to support professional growth and development of early childhood professionals? How are we thinking about advocacy and policy changes that support and promote retention? And then being able to link professional development to credentials and advancement. This is something that may look different in different states and in different communities, but it is something to explore, to think about how do we further the growth of professionals and link it to other incentives such as credentials or an advancement in practice. And then to really improve the quality of jobs and the respect required, that is required for these positions in early childhood. So in the chat, if you can, just provide us with some of your thoughts as program leaders on what opportunities do you use to support retention, or do you have access to in your programs to support retention? Would you take a few minutes? Oh, looks like a conference presentation. Great. Other ideas? Coaching. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about training here in a minute. Improving organizational climate. I think we'll get to some of that today as well. And I love the idea of creating a sense of community. That's just such a critical thing. Great. Okay. Let's flip to the next slide and we'll talk about this. Okay, great. Let me see here. There was a study that was recently done in the home visiting realm called the Urban Institute's Home Visiting Career Trajectory Study. And it really revealed a lot of common themes and reasons for turnover, which include the boxes that you're seeing on this screen. So low salary, overly large caseloads of families and or children in the classroom, lack of role clarity, and other factors, as you can see. This list is most likely not surprising, and from what I saw in the chat, definitely not surprising to you, and you may have other reasons that you've listed as well. When you look at this list, it may seem overwhelming, but one way to consider this list and to make a bit more digestible for you as program leaders is to consider the ones you have control over yourselves as you lead your program. Where is your influence and how do you use that influence to increase retention? So if you don't mind putting in the chat, which of these factors have you either struggled with as a leader or you've really gotten creative with to address? You could put a few things, that would be great. Let's see what we've got. Okay, you keep putting your messages in the chat and we will definitely keep checking. Okay, Ariel, if we might be able to do a slide change, please.
We have a few people have added to the chat.
Oh, great, thank you. Okay, so you struggle with programmatic changes? Yes, absolutely. We're going to talk in a minute about role clarity. That is a really critical component, and of the low salary. That seems to be pervasive across the field and in many states. Pursuing education, absolutely. All right. So we also want to take a look at why professionals stay, because there are reasons why professionals stay. And then you think of the areas that the program leader has influence over, and you will see that many of these boxes that are listed on the screen fall into that category. So we asked you to think about some of the struggles and challenges, but now I really want you to put your leadership hat on and think about which of these boxes do you have the most influence over. And feel free to share in the chat any creative solutions or ideas that you've utilized to promote retention in professionals and your programs as well. We believe you have the ability to enhance the quality of your programs and outcomes for families when you consider the conditions of the environment for the professionals working in your program. Job satisfaction, great. I'm gonna take a look at the chat. This looks like somebody's had some influence as a leader over job satisfaction. Many ways to think about that. Relationship building, absolutely. Absolutely, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move through this presentation and what that looks like, right, with the coworker or with the supervisor or both. It's critically important. So I appreciate you sharing. Keep sharing these ideas. We'd love to have them recorded, coworkers. I think about, life in the times of COVID right now and, this virtual experience we're all having, how home visitors and center-based professionals really have found creative ways to rely upon their coworkers and their supervisors in ways that maybe they took for granted or didn't have the opportunity to do in person. I've seen so much resilience in the field and just, like I said, that creative thinking and solution-focused approach to the work. Absolutely. Meeting once a month. All right. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing those. Okay. I think we'll talk just for a second about role clarity if we can. Oh, there we go. Thank you. We want to use an example of role clarity and think with you for just a minute about the role of the home visitor or the other early childhood professionals in the field and how role expectations can increase or decrease turnover. So I will use the home visiting role as an example because that's where I have spent my last 30 years and we'll use that as an example, but please think about your programs and how role clarity may be an example for you as well. when we think about home visiting, the role is so complex. It contains so many different elements of the work, whether it be social work, some infant mental health practice, resource coordination, community partnerships, family partnerships. It's really complicated, and it really does require the ability to self-regulate and reflect, to think about how to support families impacted by trauma that is caused by a variety of reasons, thinking about structural racism and many, many more things that, that home visitors and families partner around in the work together. It also requires extensive knowledge and skill development in areas like child development, maternal health and well-being, parent-child relationships, adolescent development if you're working with teen parents, and interpersonal and community violence. These are, there are so many factors in the role of the home visitor. But however, as we know based on our work in the field, home visiting is sometimes misunderstood and may not be recognized at the same level as a profession in many ways comparable to say a teacher or a nurse or a social worker. This is true despite the fact that we know that a high percentage of home visitors have college degrees, and a sizable portion of them have advanced degrees as well. I think the things that are different for home visitors is oftentimes their role, the scope of their role changes over time. So they come into a position with a degree, but then they have to learn how to be a home visitor. And when that happens, as I just mentioned, there are many factors and complexities in play, but what we often see with home visitors in particular is that sometimes they experience kind of this role skew, this broadening of the role that really has a potential to dilute their impact and effectiveness with families, and to really make it difficult to juggle all of the workload at one time. So when we think about that skew of the position, it really makes us think about staff retention and what that looks like. Some examples of this might be, let's say, a home visitor who is called in to sub in a classroom and not really able to then provide the services to families. Or it may be that we see home visitors and program leaders really having to alter some of the work due to new requirements that may come from various places. But when we see that, like I said, that role clarity becomes diluted, and then we have the potential and possibility for turnover in positions. All right. Ariel, if you wouldn't mind the next slide. Thank you. So this really really highlights that point. When you think about home visitors in particular, the Urban Institute surveyed 670 home visitors and supervisors to identify areas of training that they felt they needed over and beyond what they got in their specific model training. And if ever there was an illustration of the expected scope of areas of expertise inherent in a job of working with families and young children, I think this slide demonstrates it. The need for a variety of information, knowledge, skills, and abilities in these top 10 areas really highlights the complexity of the work in early childhood. Thank you, Ariel. If you could change the slide. Thank you. So now I want to hear from you again, and just thinking about all of this in terms of your own context, in your own programs, and reflect on the strategies that could be or are already being utilized to stem the tide of turnover, and really to think about the role of professional development. So when you think about closing gaps in workforce for your program or your system, and improving professional recognition of the early childhood professional field, what strategies are you using? We'd love to hear from you in the chat, and I will open my chat and see if we can capture some of your thoughts here. Any ideas? Oh, wonderful. Working with the local university to create on-site cohorts. I would imagine you get some real customization by creating those local collaborations. I think validation of work is critical, absolutely. Show and tell home visitors, how much they are appreciated? Yes, absolutely. I think that goes a long way. And I think under times of stress, it's harder to remember to do that, but it is such a key component to really making sure that professionals understand how they are valued in their work. Absolutely. All right, longer hands-on training before staff are sent out. Absolutely, really being able to make sure you have the confidence and the competence to get started, and then knowing that development grows continuously over your career is so important. And that collaboration with community partners, that's a great input. It looks like Melanie said collaboration with community partners. Absolutely, wonderful. We'll keep chatting, keep putting in the chat, and we'll move to the next slide. One of the things when we think about workforce retention levers is that we believe everyone can contribute to advancing professional recognition of the early childhood space and the field. We just really believe empowerment is everyone's job. Everyone works within this sphere of influence for programs, and it contributes to the advancement of professionalism and recognition. And it happens with systems changes, but it also happens one person at a time. So never underestimate your abilities to influence and to promote and continue to grow advancement of professional recognition of early childhood professionals. It's so important. Next slide, Ariel. Thank you. So we know that low salaries continue, as you guys pointed out in the chat, continue to be a primary driver for turnover in early childhood work. Despite having a workforce that consists of a high degree of professionalism and a high level of college degrees. And despite many home visitors' commitment to the work, we know that home visitors have made it clear that this aspect of the work can't be self-sustaining, that they share that enduring the hard work of home visiting with low pay can be mitigated initially by their commitment to helping families, but eventually home visitors can begin to feel burned out and under-supported, with low pay often being a trigger for turnover. That's nothing new. We know this, we know it's an issue, and it's forums like this where we can come together collectively and think about that I believe will make a difference in change. According to the Urban Institute survey that I referenced earlier, more than half of program managers rated low pay as a major reason for staff turnover. However, we really also want to think about this through the lens of setting up professionals to succeed, and how can that be how that can be a key indicator of job retention. Feeling supported, as you mentioned just a minute ago in the chat, feeling supported and valued, having somebody invest in them and in us as professionals, and to really take the time to help a professional learn and grow and develop into their role is really critical and is a factor that helps support retention. Being able to help a home visitor or an early childhood professional learn and grow, creating career ladders, fostering new skills, and so forth are ways that supervisors help set professionals up for success. We know obviously that there are limited opportunities sometimes for advancement or promotion in the early childhood field, and budgets may be a critical factor in that as well. But we also know that creating pathways to develop leadership skills, to enhance critical job skills, take leadership of a certain component or project or priority, can increase the level of job satisfaction. So that's really important to think about ways in which you as leaders help support success in your staff and in your team. We think that the ability to achieve a manageable workload is often associated with thoughtful program management as well, and with supervision, and that supervisors who are intentional about realistic caseloads can help professionals feel more engaged and able to manage their workloads. Ariel, if I could get the next slide, that would be helpful. Thank you. So here's something that we think about a lot. We believe that professional development plays this powerful role to promote the workforce. We also think that it elevates the identity and professional skills needed by home visitors and others required to achieve those expected outcomes with families that I mentioned earlier that can be impacted by turnover in the workforce. Being able to define the competencies and being intentional in support for ongoing proficiency goes beyond what advocacy and policy can address. It takes the systems and organizational leaders to really think about what this means, and for supervisors who have that greatest level of influence to think about workforce recruitment, retention, support, and really that professional respect that's important for work with families. It fuels our motivation as professionals, and it really does help us think about whether we continue to stay or whether we can think about leaving. Professional development is also that mechanism. There's a mechanism involved there. When you use it in a sequence, so rather than having what we would call a one and done training experience, but really thinking about a sequential competency-based learning experience that can build both that confidence and competence in the workforce is something to consider. How do we build on skills over time? How do we then ensure those skills stick? It's really important. And we know that professionals who feel more competent in their work and demonstrate that competence really do actually indicate higher levels of satisfaction and feel really more impactful, which don't we all want to feel more impactful in our role and more prepared to be able to support families and partner with families where they are. Supervisors, you play a critical role in setting the expectations for professional development with staff, but you also, not just as a mandate, but really to build that culture of curiosity, inquiry, and learning. I think I saw some chat comments about this. Really that supportive community environment in which we all engage to feel more confident and competent and connected to our work. All right, Ariel, next slide. I'm sorry that my little lines are a little skewed on this particular slide, so I'm sorry about that. But we really want to think about the levers that promote retention and how they're interlinked with one another. You know, when you set a healthy program climate and supporting environmental conditions, as it is a foundation for the work. So that's in that center circle. And then being able to layer on adequate compensation or supporting that professional growth and development in a planful way is the second layer. And then continuing to advocate for and elevate the professional recognition of early child professionals can really impact program well-being, practice, and systemic policies that support quality of programs through better staff retention. Thank you. All right, so we want to put the workforce retention levers into action here. And these are just some examples of how you might consider doing that. You might want to think about these concrete actions that leaders can take to support those rings, those concentric circles, and to mitigate turnover and job dissatisfaction. So I won't read this slide to you, you can read it, but these are just some ideas that we have in thinking about using core competencies and really thinking about those credentials and certificates I mentioned earlier. Great. All right, Ariel, next slide, please. All right. And last but not least, one of the most important levers to support retention is you, the leader. Referring back to that Urban Institute Careers Trajectory study that I mentioned, they really focused on the idea that group participants in the study, which were home visitors and supervisors, really identified those positive experiences with their supervisors and how that guidance and support really impacted their abilities to feel good about their role and their work with families. Some also shared that the supervisor really provided that guidance, while others may have, provided a more informal relationship support or a combination. And it was really critical. Being able to see and have those connections with supervisors became is a key component to the retention issues that we've been discussing. Early childhood agencies and leaders such as yourself can really think about this in terms of your own growth as a supervisor. On the slide are 9 indicators that home visitors revealed that in terms of their working relationship with supervisors and the traits that were helpful to them. So as you think about your role as a leader, I'm sure like all of us, there are things on this slide that you feel really confident about and really embrace. And then there are probably traits that you strive to grow in, as do we all. So if you want to think about this and get really brave, you may consider using this list of traits to create your own personal professional leadership goals and to grow in one or more area. I know I've been looking at this list quite a bit lately and thinking about which ones I'd like to grow in as well. We want to just make sure that, as I end my segment and hand it over to Deborah, I just want to say that this organizational culture really is a predictor of job satisfaction and retention. It's so heartening to see in the chat so many comments about ways to support the environment and being able to feel valued rather than undervalued and understood rather than misunderstood within an agency is really what builds that trust and respect. Job satisfaction also really relates in some ways to organizational structure and work culture and the direct relationships with supervisors, as we know. So I will end with that and turn it over to Deborah to talk a little bit about the identification of program level climate and conditions. But I want to thank you for being with me and for engaging on the chat during this first segment.
Thank you, Kelly. So, I'll do my sandwich piece here, and Ariel will round out the third portion, but then we'll see Kelly back. So she'll, again, be that moderator of more of our sort of ad hoc or free-flowing conversation, and she'll moderate that, but know that both Ariel and myself will be on that end piece as well. So
great.
We'll come back together. What I love about how we structured this, how we put this together, is we began with the most recent survey data. So the survey that Kelly was walking us through and emphasizing different aspects of what that home visitor practitioner, home visitor supervisor survey of their experiences and perceptions and beliefs and wants. Now what I'm going to do, we're going to pivot just a little bit, and I'm going to relate those perceptions to a 20-year body of research that has also surfaced the reasons people leave and reasons people stay. And what's so cool about this is I want you to locate, as we're going through some of these evidence-based and research-based findings, I want you to locate the very items that you wrote in the chat box, the very items that Kelly summarized, because now we're coming in with the empirical research that says everything that those people said was true of themselves, research has also found to be true, using practitioners' perceptions in center-based settings. Okay, so now I'm going to shift us a little bit into what is the research on retention and morale and performance and happiness of center-based practitioners. But I hope I'm saying humanity binds us more than anything on the planet divides us, and that you will see all of those things, all the boxes get checked. But I want to take it down to this level and say, what are the very specific mindsets, the programmatic structures and practices that this body of research found that mattered the most to supporting practitioner well-being, performance, and commitment? Can you advance for me? I'm sitting here hitting my button thinking I'm in control. Okay, thank you, Ariel. So let's go back to our roots, all of our roots. Home visiting, center-based, special ed, early intervention, we all, over the last 15, 20 years, have really oriented to the science of implementation. And what we know is that the science of implementation has been very clear on how we actually achieve socially significant outcomes for the kids and families that we're all going to work every day so motivated to support their healthy growth, development, and happiness, quite frankly. And what we know is that we need effective interventions. We need effective practices. So in this bucket is where you would put our program uses a national model of home visiting. Our program uses this set of evidence-based practices for our work as a doula. This program uses these standards and these practices, this model of early care and education in a center-based setting. So think of this bucket of effective interventions as literally like, what are we doing? What guides our practices? The next thing is, implementation science has been so clear on this. We can't just have good practices, good models, right? We have to understand that human beings are the ones implementing those practices, right? And we have to support that implementation effectively. But that's not all. Then we also know that those effective interventions, needing the supports for practitioners to implement those interventions effectively, and that context really matters. That the context in which that practitioner is making that moment-to-moment decision about an effective intervention really matters. That everything surrounding practice reaches in and affects the decisions that that practitioner is making, literally supports them or inhibits them. This combination, right? Effective interventions implemented well, and me feeling supported and capable and confident to implement the interventions well. That is what results in socially significant outcomes for children and families. Now, our field has done a lot to define and specify interventions. It's even done a fair good share of developing observation tools, direct observation tools of practitioner implementation, whether it's implementation of an ABC biobehavioral catch-up session, or it's an observation of a classroom teacher-child interaction, right? We have lots of tools that help us look at how well a practitioner is actually implementing an effective intervention or set of practices. But where we have fallen down on the game, on this equation, is we have not paid equal attention to the enabling context. And that's what this entire presentation, this entire conversation today is about. So as Kelly just summarized for us from this interview study, right, of home visitors and home visiting supervisors, where they are telling us, what is the enabling context that makes me happy? What's the enabling context that helps me struggle every day to implement a complex model effectively, right? What is it? What is it about the enabling context? Ariel, if you could advance for me. Okay, so let's take a look at where this research is coming from. This is the University of Chicago and the Consortium on School Research. And back in the 90s, a really interesting thing happened. The federal government came in and told the Chicago Public Schools that they were doing a really bad job. In fact, at that time, the then Secretary of Education at the federal level said that Chicago Public Schools was the worst performing school district in the United States of America. That's a hard one, right? What ended up happening is that the federal government required Chicago Public Schools to let go, to push down innovation, push down practice, push down improvement to the school building level. Now, what's really important to know about Chicago Public Schools is that elementary is preschool through 8th grade. So what you're looking at here are over the next 6 years from that mandate requiring individual schools, a principal, a vice principal, coordinators, supervisors, classroom teachers, guidance counselors, family engagement staff, all of those, that team was told, you are now responsible for excellence and improvement. We're done. Here's what ensued. What you see here are schools that were on a positive trend for improvement. That's the top line. It's kind of purple on my screen. The bottom line is a trajectory of schools that actually had the lowest or negative trends for improvement. So the top line were schools over time improving themselves, better student engagement, better achievement in math and reading, and then the complete opposite. Now, if we can advance to the next slide, what I'd like you to do is use the chat box, and I want you to reflect on this and enter into the chat. What do you think was different about the enabling context or the climate and conditions in the preschool through 8th grade elementary schools that successfully improved over time from those that stagnated? Now, you should all think back to Kelly's portion and all of the thoughts you had there, because I'm telling you ahead of time that these conditions are pretty similar. All right, so let's see. Yes, we'll absolutely give you access to the slides, no problem. So you can all rely. I know I'm a crazy note taker myself, but you'll get those. Any ideas on what was different between the schools that were on a trajectory of improvement versus the schools that were on a trajectory of stagnation? All right, here we go. So I see an increase in ownership and collaboration of staff in the work and in the work environment, social interactions, parent social interactions and engagement. Peggy says probably avenues for staff and supervisory support and those interactions in a positive way. Again, between the two schools on a positive trajectory and on a negative one, these things differentiated them. Thinking outside of the box, teamwork. Those that were stagnating were stuck in doing things one way. Oh my gosh, Melanie, yes. Okay, let's go on to the next slide and you'll see how prescient and brilliant you all are. So what they found in these preschool through 8th grade school buildings was that leadership was absolutely the differentiator. But while leadership is lonely at times, the vehicle that those leaders used was so critical, and they used teamwork, they used collaboration, they used regular dialogue, discussion on the work. So the first essential, the first enabling context that was essential and different was leadership that was both facilitative and practice-based. So these were people, leaders and supervisors, program coordinator types, who were deeply committed to the success of their practitioners. So they were facilitative. They built trust. They built relationships, right? And then they used that relationship to encourage, to call out where learning or practice fidelity was or wasn't happening. And then they made sure that they had a strong community of practice, a strong program-based community of practice in which daily, weekly, and monthly practitioners were talking about the real and relevant problems they were having. The other thing, specifically for center-based programs, was that there was clarity in what we were doing. So somebody earlier in the chat box wrote the importance of having a focus on a common goal, of a clear sense of purpose, right? Kelly also called out for home visiting programs in particular, role clarity. What this looks like in center-based and in schools is a clarity of what we're here to do, right? And how we do it. So these other essentials that you see are as much about practice clarity, right? What the effective interventions are, as much as they are the conditions that allow those practices to be strong. So you see leadership is an essential that is driving change, driving happiness, driving performance, driving improvement. They do that through structuring and protecting time for daily, weekly, and monthly conversation and teamwork. And what are they talking about in these teamwork situations, right? They're not sessions to complain. They're not complaint sessions. What they are are structured opportunities to use frameworks and data to talk together about what are we doing, what are our practices, how is it going? What do I need to learn more? What can I learn from my colleague who seems to have that piece really well? I'm pretty much an expert at this other piece. How do we have that exchange? So the conversation and the collaboration is very importantly structured on the ambitiousness of the practice, on the involvement and engagement of communities and families in the work, and on how supportive the environment is for growth, development, and learning for everybody. All right, very important. Next slide, please. A key research finding here is that improvement and excellence in practice and outcomes for children and families really flowed from all of these essentials being strong. It's a combined strength that matters. So importantly, if you can click twice more, it'll bring me in there we go. So much so that in schools where they were strong on at least 3 of these essentials, and importantly, 2 of those 3 essentials were leadership and collaboration, but when they were strong on 1 more, they were 10 times more likely to be in that top bar. They were 10 times more likely to improve student learning, growth, and development over time than the schools in that bottom bar. And this really stood out to me when I came across this research. And it's kind of scary, and it should take your breath away, but we're going to go on to learn more about the specifics of these conditions, these enabling contexts, so this won't take your breath away. But they also found in this research that a sustained weakness in even one of those essentials relegated any improvement initiative on any content and any front to less than a 10% chance of success. So back to that idea that these enabling contexts, these conditions come together to create a context that is either far more supportive of the deep, complicated work of early childhood practitioners, or it ain't. It was really not a messy middle. So let's go on to the next slide, if you will. Now, some of you are saying, okay, Deborah, that was all pre-K through 8th grade. What about really infant, toddler, and preschool? So for the last 10 years, my personal R&D and research has been on studying whether or not these enabling contexts, as described in this framework of essentials, matter also in early childhood. And I'm going to not spend time here today on that process. That's another presentation, but I can tell you that this is a statement. Yes, these enabling contexts matter also greatly in preschool settings, and I'm halfway through demonstrating their value in infant and toddler settings as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so my research using surveys that practitioners and families respond to on these conditions. So the questions that they're responding to ask the practitioner, ask the family member about the health of the facilitative and instructional leadership, about the opportunities they do or do not have to collaborate with peers, to collaborate across home and school, about the outreach of practitioners to asking for parent voice, asking for parent influence. That was the other thing I noticed too in the chat box when Kelly was talking with you all. Somebody put lack of staff influence, like a barrier was a lack of influence. You could not be more right. My research has shown that it's both staff feeling an influence over the programming, but also, no shocker, parents. When parents feel a sense of influence over the program, policies, procedures, and yes, experiences their child or children are having, that sense of influence creates a much stronger, healthier, enabling context for the work. So simply put, this is a quote from my write-up of this research. Simply put, programs strongly organized to these essentials create a context far more supportive of teaching, learning, and family engagement than the context created by weakly organized programs. Very importantly, programs, when these conditions were strong, what we found is that it empowered leaders, teachers, staff, and families to aspire to and realize higher quality practices and better outcomes for young children. The very idea that when you take care of my well-being, whether it's the well-being in my role as family or it's my well-being as a practitioner, I am so motivated to give you the shirt off my back, right? To do this work well. Next slide, please. All right. So this is just, you can get this research brief, but I just wanted to pop this up here because the strength of these essentials, again, so staff survey, parent survey, when parents and staff were saying, yes, these are the supports I receive. These are the enabling conditions that I experience on a pretty regular basis in this place. The classroom assessment scoring system scores were higher in all three domains. And this is what I call performance. Next slide, please. In addition, when staff and families were saying, yeah, this place is organized to this stuff. You know, I receive this kind of enabling context. Children's attendance was much higher, much more predictable than when staff and families were saying, no, this place is not organized to these things. This is not my experience. What we also found is that chronic absenteeism, when places were weakly organized to these essentials, chronic absenteeism was almost 50% higher than in the other buildings. Let's go on to the next slide. So I want to give you a little bit of a sense in my concluding remarks here of what it feels like. So a lot of people over the years have said to me, you know, I can read these essentials, I can see them on paper. Thank you for making sure that these are relevant and valid for early childhood settings. But I need to understand more. What does it sound like or feel like, right? If a staff member is saying, yes, I have opportunities to collaborate and struggle and grapple with problems of practice, like really, what does that feel like and sound like and look like? So we went the extra mile to do qualitative research where we went in and observed day over day over day in programs where the survey score said, yes, we're organized, and importantly, in programs where the survey score says, no, we're not organized to these things. So moving from left to right, in programs that had these strong enabling contexts and that were achieving these higher quality outcomes, what we saw and heard is staff were able to describe that they held common understandings of their goals for high quality teaching, learning, and engagement of families. And I'm going to call it up again too, because I took notes from the chat box when Kelly was talking. Somebody said, this is about the clear sense of purpose. This is about focusing on a common goal, right? Here it is. And very importantly, that leaders and supervisory vision was not about the minutia or the rules, right? It was about a purpose-driven vision. Yes, there was curriculum or a program model, but this leader and supervisory vision superseded that. It was literally the holding hands, why we're here, activate of the heart, the purpose of the program from that perspective. Then these leaders made sure that staff had emotionally supportive relationships with each other and that they had these organizational routines to do exactly that, then to talk about the accepted curriculum or the accepted practice models that they were expected to implement, and made sure that they weren't left alone with that. You know what to do. In the weekly organized context, in the weekly organized places, that's what staff were telling us. staff would say, well, around here, I'm just expected to know how to do this and how to do it well when a problem comes up. There are no supports. And importantly, in weakly organized places, it was very demoralizing to staff to not have a purpose-driven vision and unity of purpose. They would say things like, there's no passion here. There's no passion. People just show up, you're expected to do the work kind of procedurally and go home. That's pretty demoralizing. This middle one, leaders, teachers, and staff viewed social emotional development as the foundation from which all other learning happened. And in these strongly organized programs, that would make sense. If you have a purpose-driven vision for why we're all here, you are going to understand that my number one job is to love each other and love the children and families so that we have healthy sense of self, healthy sense of interpersonal trust, right, from which all other learning can flow. Leaders, teachers, and staff believe that partnerships with families were critical to their effectiveness. Now, don't just like let that go. Really hold on to that. Was critical to their ability to do their own job. That is very different than the weakly organized places where there was a lot of blame game going on. Blaming your colleagues, blaming the leader, blaming yourself, blaming preschoolers for being preschoolers, blaming families. So in this place, in these strongly organized places, the staff really believed that they had failed if they had not been able to build trusting partnerships with families that would outlast whatever grade level the child is moving into. Lastly, interactions and conversations among staff and between staff and families was frequent, it was warm, it was encouraging, and the language that families used is, they don't have any secrets here. You know, they're very transparent here. If they don't know something, they'll tell me. If they forgot to think about something, they'll tell me. And the opposite in the weakly organized places. Ariel, we're going to skip to 2 forward just so I can stay on time for you. Okay, so I want to end with teacher voice. And I really want you to notice her choice of words here. So this is a teacher who was in one of these strongly, you know, a program with a strong enabling context. And I want you to listen through. She's talking about well-being. She's talking about performance. She's talking about commitment. And remember, commitment is what gets us retention, right? I feel like it's empowering here. It's not just from the top down. We believe in this stuff and I have something to share and it's valued by your administrator. Then your co-teachers and your colleagues also buy in too. And you have that energy and you have that love. It's about an administrator that pushes you in that way and supports you and guides you and nudges you a bit further. It's what we're expected to do with our young students even now when they're only 3. So she leads by example for sure. So I'm going to end not with my voice, but with this teacher voice. And Ariel is going to pick it up at this point and describe what this teacher is saying. It's about an administrator, a supervisor that pushes you and nudges you and supports you, right? He's going to go into great detail about what that looks like. And I hope today what I've left you with is a real understanding that practice improvement, practice fidelity, model fidelity, skillfulness of implementation comes by surrounding the human beings with a sense of well-being, a sense of motivating purpose. From there comes that wake up every day. I'm going to do this. I'm going to work on this weakness in my practice or work on this weakness in my model fidelity. I'm going to work on my performance. And I'm committed to this place. I'm committed to making this place and this program as great as it can be. So I thank you for this little bit of time here together. I'm going to turn it over to Ariel and take myself off camera and audio, and I'll see you again in about 20 minutes.
And thank you so much, Deborah and Kelly. I feel like as we've been going through the session, we got very broad, thinking about the field conditions. And now Deborah spent a lot of quality, wonderful time with us thinking about those program level conditions that really impact and support the practitioner. And a lot of what you were saying, especially the enabling context, really hit upon what I'm going to be speaking to next, which is really that those supervisory conditions and traits that support practitioner success. So as we go through the session, remember, please, you can add to the chat, add to the question and answer box. We'll be having some time at the end to go through the question and answer box as well. And I look forward to engaging you in this discussion that really hits upon to what most of you in the session currently do have control over. We might not have always control over the pay structure, and things like that, but we do have control over other areas that we can really support and build partnerships with our staff as well as with the families that we support as well. So there's quite a few areas that I plan on focusing in on, whether it might be thinking about the complexities and challenges of the role of the supervisor, kind of having a head start perspective around the relationship-based competencies, looking at the evolution of the supervisor-supervisee relationship, thinking about COVID and virtual reflective supervision, as well as thinking about supports for professional development. And we'll touch upon all of these, but it'll help me to understand which one of these areas are of most interest to you. And I believe Fernando has a poll that we're gonna give folks around 30 seconds to a minute to respond to that'll give us insight around what are the areas that are of most interest to you. So Fernando, can you put up that poll, please? Poll number 1, there we go. Thank you. So I'm gonna give you guys, again, around 30 seconds to 45 seconds to kind of think about these different items. Once we get to the end, Fernando will close the poll and we'll share the results. And Fernando, when you get close to when you think you have enough responses, you can go ahead and close the poll. And let's see. Wonderful. So kind of what I was guessing, that it really is across the board. There's interest across the board from different topics. So we'll spend a little bit of time on, but we did get consensus that that last piece, the support for professional development, is a piece that you are very interested in. So that's a great cue for myself to kind of dig in a little bit deeper with that. So thank you so much. You can take off the poll, Fernando. Wonderful, wonderful. And to start the session, again, I'm coming in with assumptions that most of us here are providing direct supervisory support to practitioners. It might be center-based teachers, family support specialists, home visitors. But I want to start with a little kind of brain teaser, a little brainstorming. And I want you to think as broadly or as narrowly the different roles that you have as a supervisor. And I hope to develop a diverse list of responsibilities. And I think it'll be helpful for us to see that about how broad our work is as supervisors and leaders. So take a few moments, think about all the supervisory responsibilities that you might have in your role or job as supervisor or leader. And let's start typing into the chat box some of those out, and we'll see if we can get a robust list. Cameron is talking about building capacity, motivating, mentoring, and those are actually some of my favorite parts about being a supervisor, kind of being able to shepherd and support that professional growth with the staff that you support. Thank you, Cameron, for that. Others, what are some of those kind of responsibilities you hold? A firefighter, yeah, you're the one that people come to. You might have time for dedicated reflective supervision, or you might just have an open door policy and people are coming to you and you help extinguish concerns, challenges, things that come up. Thank you so much, Kimberly. Making sure that all the equipment is working well at that school, a lot of technical support, yes. Being curious, a listener, observing, monitoring. A lot of you are responsible for reporting as well, but then also motivating and coaching. Awesome. And affirming each other person's value. Yes, and we all have worth and we all have a reason why we're there, and really to support the mission of the organization that you're coming from. So thank you so much for that. My next slide actually comes from one of our online courses around supervision. But I think you kind of boil down a lot of those, responsibilities you mentioned. It kind of falls into these 5 areas where supervisors come in as advocates. They really advocate for their staff. Sometimes they're the intermediary between their staff and upper management as well, or upper leadership, as well as advocate for the needs of the families in the community. They hear from staff what's happening and try to make sure that they're putting in policies, procedures, and supports to better support the families. Also a listener, and I saw a lot of that in the chat box as well, that you're there to kind of be with staff, listen to them, to then help shape and grow them. A facilitator of information, not just telling your staff what to do, but having a conversation about that. Being a trainer, many times you participate and join in a leadership position and don't realize part of this is also training, thinking about when you hire staff, how do you onboard them? And then being a leader, really understanding the mission of the program, the mission of the model, and how you want to be, and being able to rally around those missions and bring your staff along as well, so they believe in it as well. So there's a lot of that too. And actually, this comes from a wonderful article that was in 0 to 3 from Metz and Bartley. And I really like this because sometimes it gets overwhelming to think about all those different responsibilities that supervisors, carry. And you can almost drown sometimes with so much stuff that you have waiting in the office, whether it's the reports, whether it's the hiring, whether it's the, putting down fires, but there's a lot of things. But the lens, and this is the lens that Kelly and Deborah have been talking about, is how do we improve outcomes for children? What we've learned, the research has been very clear, right? Supervisors have a big role to play. And actually, there are some very clear drivers that support those outcomes in children. And those drivers are kind of listed here, the organizational drivers. And when you think about those organizational drivers, what we're talking about here is having those kind of nuts and bolts things, implementing model requirements, having policies and procedures. Those are kind of things that drive the outcomes for families. Now, what are the pieces, right? Are we putting in the pieces of Head Start and early Head Start? Are we following through with our performance standards? A lot of that are those organizational drivers. Then there's another component, which is the leadership drivers. This is kind of what you bring. This is your reflective supervision. This is you driving the vision for your staff that you support, the encouraging, the motivating. A lot of that falls under this leadership, driver. And then the third piece goes with, I think a couple of you mentioned this as well, is that training piece. That supporting the competency in your staff, and identifying what are competencies that are going to make your staff not just successful in their positions, but thrive. And it depends. There are some very common ones around relationship-based building, but there might be some other competencies that are specific to the role as teacher or family support specialist or home visitor, and making sure that there is training, support for them, and then follow-up back at the organization and discussion to support that. But if you put those drivers together, that with effective strategies to implement, that's where you get to those outcomes for families and children. And if we stick with the competency driver, one of the competency areas, especially for Head Start and early Head Start, that you guys should be very familiar with are the Head Start family engagement relationship-based competencies. And these are wonderful. I know this is something that most programs have to use. I even recommend it to the programs that aren't Head Start or early Head Start to look at it, because these competencies, Head Start did a wonderful, wonderful job in kind of providing these competencies that will support whether you're a teacher or a childcare provider, or a supervisor of a teacher and a childcare provider, if you're a family service professional, family support specialist, a supervisor, a family support specialist, a home visitor, or a supervisor of a home visitor. These are competencies not only to be aware of, but reflect on and use that to build your professional development around those competencies. There's a link underneath this slide that has where you can find those relationship-based competencies on the Head Start eClick website as well. And these are the actual competencies. So hopefully you've seen this. And I really hope to help bring these to life because it's easy to kind of take these 10 competency-based areas that are based on relationships and just build a checklist around it. And like I said, in the Head Start in eClick, you can find a self-assessment that you could encourage staff to take individually and have a conversation to support the professional growth. You know, but hopefully it becomes more than a checklist. The RBCs, just to kind of give some frame, describes the knowledge, skills, and individual practices that early childhood professionals use to engage families to effectively support positive goal-oriented relationships. These competencies are based on research and recommended practices across many different fields working with families from pregnancy through the early childhood years. So when we think about effective family engagement, that means that professionals and family work together in partnership. Where have I heard that before? Deborah was just speaking to the need of supervisors and staff working in partnerships. Well, then we also have staff working with families in partnerships to build those trusting relationships that recognize family strengths for supporting their family's well-being and their child's healthy development. And I'm curious, with the expertise in this room, I'm sure some of you have already had success in supporting staff around some of these competency areas. And we have a second poll that Fernando's going to pull up. And what I'm going to ask you is to kind of take a look at these 10 competencies and think about what is one that you've been very intentional in supporting your staff in. So I've listed all 10 out, and think about what's one area that you've supported staff in. That is something that's active, that you're currently doing, you're currently using in your home visiting programs or your center-based programs. We'll give you around 20 to 30 seconds to finish up the polling, and then Fernando will share the results of the polls with us. All right, Fernando, if you can get ready to close the poll and share out the results. Excellent. So as I'm looking through here, most have been around that positive goal-oriented relationship and supporting staff within that, with a few others around professional growth and the culturally responsive relationships with family well-being kind of round out the rest. And I'm curious if anybody is willing to put in the chat box, what is an example? Like, how have you supported? Let's look at the one that had the most votes, those positive goal-oriented relationships. How have you supported staff in building those with families? So encouraging and support. And I'm guessing is, kind of supporting them to reach out to family and support their relationships with their families, kind of putting that high above as a priority of the program, which is important because most of your programs have a lot of assessments to complete. You have a lot of screenings, a lot of forms, but how do we ensure that positive goal-oriented relationships are at the top of the list? Other strategies of how you supported staff in building those positive goal-oriented relationships? So Josie talked about, she talked about for family well-being. So let's get to family well-being in a second. Maybe Doug, providing opportunities for families to learn skills through family classes. So using those groups, those family groups or those socializations for families to learn about each other and kind of speaking about these, or is a great example. Reflective supervision that highlights the need for strong relationships essential to setting the work, to working towards goals. To me, that really hits the nail on the head, because we can't tell our staff to do something that we don't actually practice. So if we're talking about that, we really value that they develop positive and goal-oriented relationships with their families. As supervisors and leaders, we need to do the same with our staff. You know, make sure that we build positive goal-oriented relationships with our staff, so they feel, you know, not just, do as I say, not what you see, but you're really there to kind of follow through with staff. So thank you so much for that. And then during the COVID time, we're really needing to attend to supporting families as teachers. They are, yes, and we're relying on families to do more, which is actually one of the unintended consequences. I don't think there's really anything that good that comes out of COVID, but an unintended consequence is that we're forced to empower parents to do more. And that's a wonderful thing, right? That we come alongside families instead of doing for families. And that builds a lot of resiliency as well. So thank you so much. And I want to get back to Josie real quick, because she spoke to the family well-being section, kind of understanding when to refer out to an outside agency, which is excellent, and when to lean in on informal resources that families may have, because a lot of families struggle reaching out to community partners because they might not be used to that, or there could be feelings that come with that of, I need to be able to figure things out on my own or within my own family structure. And so a lot of families do have internal or informal supports that can help them when they're in hard times. So thank you so much for that. So we'll do our last poll that we have here, Fernando, which is going to actually speak into which is one of the areas that you would want to focus in on more. So we looked at which ones you were doing, which one you were supporting actively. Now let's pivot and think about which one has been a challenge. And so we're going to give you a few seconds to work on this one. Think about those 10 competency areas and which one has been challenging. And I think we'll give them another 10 to 20 seconds, Fernando, and then you can close the poll and share the responses to the group. I'll be curious to see which ones might be a little more difficult. And as we're getting that together, be ready to kind of share in your chat box why you put or why you selected that one. Why is it a challenge to support staff in that specific area? So just get ready, kind of prime your brains for that. Wow, all across the board here, all across the board. So yeah, I think there can be challenges to every single one of these. And I think for leadership and advocacy, that one came up a little bit higher than that. And just to kind of give context, the practice for leadership and advocacy is being able to work alongside parents to build on their strengths as advocates for their families and as leaders in the program and the community. Does anybody want to share in the chat box about which one they chose and why that has been a challenge? And there could be a lot of reasons for the challenges, right? I mean, it could be a lack of training support. Maybe it could be a supervisor that doesn't have a lot of expertise in that area. Maybe it hasn't been a focus of the organization. But I'm kind of curious to see if anybody's willing to kind of share a little bit about why it has been a challenge, not just which one is a challenge. Yeah, I think, Cameron, you make a good point though. Sometimes we don't prioritize it as an organization. Sometimes it's easier to go to the checklist. It's easier to do the things that is in black and white and not in the grays. So when we don't prioritize, sometimes we get overwhelmed with all the things that we're doing and we might not focus in on it. Melanie talks about data. The data supports children's stories, and sometimes if it's not collected properly, it's hard to share those stories. One of my colleagues calls data input as garbage in and garbage out, right? If you don't do a good job curating your data, it's hard to pull it out to really share that story. And that story is so important because that's what really highlights the work in progress that you're doing in your organizations. Training, enormous training. Sometimes we don't get enough training to properly fulfill the expectation. And it's difficult because training, especially before COVID, meant we had to go somewhere in person. Sometimes there was an expense to it. You lose a whole day. So it's time, it takes up a lot of time. So there's a lot that comes to that as well. And then for number 6, some families are afraid to ask for support. Then it's hard to support them if they're not asking. And Catherine talked about number 2, the culture competency area, that during this time of racial tension in our country, it's important to remember the connections between elevating and validating families' voices and our students' emotional and social well-being. Very well said. Thank you. And the last one, Josie talked about leadership and advocacy. Working alongside families who speak another language, it's hard to give them their voice if sometimes they have difficulties as well. And then working through interpreters can be difficult. All very, very key, important, reasons. Thank you for sharing that. Keep this in mind, because when we talk about professional development and professional learning, we'll look back at these because there are some supports that are built in areas you can go in for more help as well. But we're starting to run a little short on time, so I do want to move forward. And actually, this is one of my favorite slides as well. The evolution of the reflective supervision help and relationship. To me, this is critical. Supporting and building staff competency is a lot of work, and having staff come from different supervisory, programmatic, educational backgrounds and cultural backgrounds means that we can't cookie cutter how we support staff. We have to individualize our support to our practitioners. And being aware of where you are with them in the supervisor-supervisee relationship can facilitate your working relationship and moving to one of high trust and high performance. This speaks to that your relationship with your staff progresses very similar to how your staff kind of progresses with their helping relationship with families. And that when you first have a staff come on board, there is an orientation and discovery stage. They might not be sure about this whole reflective supervision thing, right? They might be shy. They might be reserved. They might not self-disclose. They can get frustrated. I had a sister who came out from a different line of work and came into early childhood, and she had a very reflective supervisor, and she struggled with reflective supervision because she would come with a problem for the supervisor to solve, to firefight, and instead of getting an answer, the supervisor would respond with a question. And she would be like, well, just tell me the answer. But she got used to this level of reflective supervision. She had to go through this whole process, but it really helped her, kind of become more self-aware and then be able to better support families, because truly, who knows the families more than the staff that's working with them, not the supervisor. You can support, come alongside with, but it's the person who's going in and day out, or working with a child in the classroom day in and day out, who will know that family more. So you come in and support. And so as a supervisor, you have strategies that you can use to move your practitioner along to the next side. So for that very first level, you'll use active listening, you stay calm, you allow the practitioner to be unsure, validate their emotions, with the goal to build that trust and clarifying the response. And then you move through, and you can take a moment to kind of look through the rest of the stages. I'm glad you'll be presented this PowerPoint so you can spend more time with this individually. And this was adapted from parents and teachers. I do a lot of work with parents and teachers, and they provide this type of support to a lot of the supervisors that are PAT supervisors. But with the goal of trying to eventually get to a point of reflection and discovery. And that's a beautiful place where your staff are coming to you, they know what to expect, they know when you're meeting, they know that you're gonna have a dialogue and a discussion, they're vulnerable with you, and then you kind of wander together and you can challenge them a little bit, and you get to that complete trust and high work performance. So wonderful. I did also want to speak a little bit about COVID and how it's changed the way we engage our practitioners. So I have a few tips that I picked up along the way also from parents as teachers, things that will support you having success with staff through COVID and this virtual environment that we're in. And a lot of these I've heard that supervisors are already implementing, so this might not be new news to you. And then there might be other things that you might say, like, this is a great idea. So we'll go through these 5 areas pretty quickly. The first one is to stay in touch. Even in a virtual, behind a computer screen, you can still build a sense of community and empowerment. We just have to be more intentional to do this. So we have to be intentional that we check in with staff on a pretty regular basis. And I look at this both as a supervisor with a wonderful team that I support in a virtual setting now, as well as to what we're hearing in the field. To make sure that reflective supervision remains important. I always value a supervisor having an open door policy and having them come, tell the practitioner, call me when you need me, or come into my office if they were in the same location. But it can't replace dedicated, intentional, reflective supervision where it's timed, when you both know you're going to meet together, you both have a shared agenda of areas that will be kind of spoken to. So that continues to be critical. Continuing staff meetings virtually, but then also including some informal meetups. I've heard of some supervisors will schedule lunch, an informal time to meet with staff. So it's not always just around work. And so that might be something to practice, and making your staff a priority. And I know with my staff, I do a lot of, we have a lot of video interactions and emails, but we also have a group text, right? And it might be something work related, it might be something not work related. And it's just a place for all of us to kind of come together. So staying in touch is critical in this COVID world that we're in now. Staying connected, doesn't have to equal being disconnected. But making sure you have some agreements in place. What's going to be the platform? What's going to be the expectation? Those are great things to be thinking in mind. Using video, which can be hard, right? If you're working from home, there might be a lot of stuff happening in the background. Maybe you have a messy, back as well, but you can encourage, virtual screens like I do. I have a virtual background right now, encouraging headphones to have some quiet space, but using video because you pick up a lot on the nonverbal cues, making the experience interactive. So it's not just you speaking to your group, but there's a back and forth happening. Be okay with silence. It's something that I had to work on as well, especially in a virtual setting. If you ask something, you have to give folks an opportunity to think about it, reflect on it, and time to type or share out. But you can also make it fun. I know we did an icebreaker where we asked people to share mementos from around their desk. Some people shared, pictures of family members, or trophies, or knickknacks, or things that you just have around you, coffee mugs. So just make the experience fun as well. And I think that's kind of what Josie's talking about in the chat, right? Jokes, affirmations, and messages. Stay aware. This is important. As a supervisor, don't just look, but watch. Don't just hear, but listen. Try to read the cues, from across the screen. Truly listen. Practice that active listening. Ask follow-up questions. Express empathy. Be curious and maintain your self-awareness. Stay informed. This is a scary time between COVID and all the racial injustice and everything happening in our streets. Knowledge is power. Make sure you're sharing information to your staff. Be in tune with what Head Start or other early childhood entities have, information that they have to share out. Listen to feedback from staff as well as from families and talk about that and communicate regularly. Angel talks about we have to remain flexible as supervisors, especially when our staff are working at home and balancing their families and keeping healthy. And it's a delicate balance. It's a hard line to walk, but that's what we do as leaders and supervisors. And lastly, stay real. Be authentic, be true, create positive environment, motivate staff, try different things out. This really is almost a blank canvas to try new strategies. So lead from the front with confidence and honesty. Be transparent, but also check in on yourself. This is hard not just for staff, but it's hard for supervisors. It's hard for you. And take care of yourself as well. make sure you're following up with your supervisor or your supports to make sure that you're there for the staff that you have as well. So just good tips, good things to keep in mind to help us better help staff, who then in turn can better help support their families. So wonderful. And I want to take a last look at kind of supporting our practitioners in professional development and professional learning. And we do this a lot of different ways. I think we can't really underestimate the importance of quality hiring in onboarding practices. And when we speak about onboarding quality hiring, it's not just the certificates or the degree that your folks have, but think back to the conversations, what we heard from Kelly and Deborah, of those qualities needed to be successful as a practitioner and want to stay within your job and position. You want to hire somebody with those soft skills as well, right? How empathic are they? How encouraging, how strength-based are they? You know, those with experiences is something that it's very valuable. So, you know, things to keep in mind. Do they speak another language? Are they from the community that they work in? I mean, it all can provide a new perspective or a different perspective to your agency. So that's something to really keep in mind. Continue consistent reflective supervision is critical to that support of professional learning, professional development. Collaborative team meetings. Remember back to what Deborah said of those enabling contexts. Leaders can't do that by itself. It happens in partnership and in collaboration. And so having team meetings that bring people together and working together around different things that come up as well. Supporting professional development plans. Most organizations have an annual requirement when it comes to professional development plans and goals, but hopefully it is around the work that they do to support their job role and job clarity. And so if you don't have something like that, you might want to pull from eClick. Look at those self-assessments, those competency-based self-assessments to help your staff think about goals that are grounded in competencies that you can then support. The importance of community of practice groups or peer learning groups to give folks a space to talk about their real experiences. And then trainings, conferences like these and workshops is another place to go. And again, we know that some of these things can be difficult because of travel and distance, but one of the things I want to make sure to share that brings together the Head Start relationship-based competencies is we do offer Achieve On Demand, national home visiting, self-paced courses, and live facilitated webinars. These are wonderful courses that fit not just the home visiting realm, but actually also supports anybody that's in early childhood education. This is a document that we're going to provide you that shares all our self-paced courses and webinars, live webinars that we offer. And it's a nice crosswalk between our courses as well as the relationship-based competencies that we looked upon earlier on. So there are some that you are finding trouble or struggling to support staff in. This could be a place to go to, along with other early childhood providers in your community and your area as well. So that would be something I would really encourage folks to follow the link at the bottom because the link will have a little bit more. Let me see if I can share mine. So this is the actual website, the Achieve On Demand website. And again, you have this professional development training, which will go more in depth around our self-paced courses. So you can click on it, it'll give you more description, or our webinars as well. So our webinars can give you, those are live facilitated webinars with folks across the country that come together. So I just wanted to share that real quick. Your role as a supervisor and a leader is critical to the development of confident and competent staff, which is what we want to build, that will directly impact the quality of work they provide to families. We need to be intentional about it. We need to embrace that we're an important piece to these outcomes with families and children. And we can be successful, that we have it within us to be competent and successful. The last point I'll talk about the Achieve On Demand is not only are these courses for direct staff and practitioners, there's also a set of courses for supervisors as well. So something that you can take if you yourself want to get more grounded in the practice, or you're looking for courses for your practice as a supervisor and a leader. With that being said, I'm going to move it over to Kelly to kind of work to close our session out. We do have a few questions to reflect on, as well as encourage you to think about other questions and answers to share with us.
Great. Thank you, Deborah and Ariel, for sharing your wisdom with us today. We wanted to leave a few minutes for a couple of things. One, if you have questions for us that we didn't answer in the presentation, please put those in the chat. We'd be happy to answer those. But also just to think with you about what you're taking away from today that may influence your practice as a leader and your program. So we put a few questions up here that we'd love to hear from you in the chat or in the Q&A section around what you see as the critical roles and functions of early childhood programs in promoting this workforce retention we've been speaking about. And really also, you know, what are the implications for you and your work? What was there anything that sparked your you know, thinking and desire to try something during our time together? And really, what are the gaps in our understanding that we're missing, or what needs to be filled? And then last but not least, who else should we all be engaging in this conversation as we take this information and thinking back to our programs across the country? So I'm going to ask my colleagues, Ariel and Deborah, to also chime in here if, as the questions may come in, and just leave a little space for dialogue here. Please feel free to use the chat or the Q&A. I've learned over my years as a home visitor to be okay with silence. So we'll sit here for a minute and see. Yeah, yes, it looks like Maria has a comment about it's important not to stagnate the teachers and to remember to have fun. I don't know, Deborah, if you have thoughts on that.
Oh, I'm just like, my heart's like, you know, lighting up. And thank you, Alejandra, also for the expression of gratitude.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I feel like we can make teacher influence or staff influence sound so antiseptic. And what you just captured there, Maria, is, you know, part of allowing clinical influence is influence in the kind of teacher or home visitor or doula or supervisor. Like, what is my personality in that? And I think that that is also from a practitioner's perspective, how they experience influence, for sure.
Yes, and I see Cameron had a question. Earlier in your presentation, Deborah, you mentioned facilitative and practice-based leadership. And I saw a couple of chats scroll through about that and how it looks like Cameron's taking that away today.
Yeah. So, you know, in preschool, at the more the preschool age level, the term that's floating around is educational leadership or instructional leadership, because that's most adjacent to K-12 schooling, right? And as I've been bringing this understanding and measurement of enabling context to 0 to 2, right away, the word like instructional leader or ambitious interactions and instruction just really didn't resonate. You know, just the terminology, not the constructs, but the titles, right? And I have found myself really going back to the literature, really going back to the original data collection and my own research and the language of facilitation, right? What are you facilitating? You're facilitating human interaction and relationships, right? And what are you guiding and shaping? You're guiding those effective interventions and a human being's ability to implement, you know, sometimes pretty complicated interventions and program models and practices with purpose, with intentionality, with confidence that if I do it this way, it really does matter. It changes the outcome. And so it really felt like to me, and that's really the practice-based leadership is kind of borrowing from Head Start, right? We have practice-based coaching, and it just seemed like, and we're getting feedback that the language of a facilitative and practice-based leader or supervisor is really resonating, especially in 0 to 2.
Mm-hmm. Great. And it looks like Catherine is really thinking about a few things, really about the connection between staff retention and family retention, and the impacts of having, you know, all of our work in early childhood is really built around relationships. And to be able to have and build and grow those strong and trusting relationships takes time, and it takes commitment. And so to make that connection between our professionals remaining on board and engaged and connected to families over time really leads to that ability for families to open up and trust and stay connected as well. So I appreciate that comment, Catherine. And then, Catherine, you also mentioned about the relationship-based competencies being very family-focused. And I'm not sure, Ariel, if you want to address that or if there's anything more that needs to be said there, but I found that to be a really insightful comment.
Yeah, and I love the unapologetically family-focused.
Yes.
No, that's exactly right. I truly believe the relationship is at the base of everything. Everything else will come if you trust in that building of the relationship. And I really, like I said, Head Start did a really nice job of being very thoughtful. And it says you're not grounded in Head Start or not from a Head Start program, go into the link because you're gonna, I think, find a lot of use for the self-assessment. Think about your role, whether it's a home-based or center-based role, and try to find the one that most fits your position, a supervisor or direct practitioner, and kind of go through. It has a lot of questions that will gauge your skills and knowledge around all these different areas, which will make you feel very competent in some and say, wow, I got this. Or it might say like, oh, this is an area where I can really focus in on. So I really appreciate that comment, Catherine. Hopefully you find use. I think there's so much richness coming from early childhood, from so many different types of, research, policy, models that we need to, kind of bring in those that make most sense for our families and our communities.
Great. And I love Josie's comment about increasing self-reflection guidance and reach out to my own supervisor for the same support. And we just want to acknowledge that program leaders and supervisors carry a lot of weight on their shoulders. And, you do wonderful work and support teams and support families, but it is really critical to remember to take care of yourself as well. If you have a supervisor that you can count on, that is fantastic. If you, want to create some supervisory communities of practice with peers, some peer learning groups, I mean, there are lots of options, but please take care of yourselves and be mindful of your own well-being as you're trying to support program staff and families. All right. Oh, Deborah, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I was trying to be polite. This concept, I love where we landed here, right? The parallel process. And those that have not been in early childhood, are this concept, this construct, and this language of parallel process is often very new to them. And what I think is so important about what Josie brought up here is everything we understand in early childhood in particular, everything is nested, right? Something surrounds everything. And my work has now, in addition to turning to making sure that, that these organizational enabling context and conditions are as relevant and validated for early childhood center-based programs and settings. The other piece is I've also turned my attention to the next layer out, which is what Josie brings up here. So what I'm finding qualitatively is that my ability as a program leader, a program supervisor, so I'm under one roof or I'm under one program auspice, right? my ability to embody and build towards these drivers, right? Those 3 drivers. I need to manage upward, like the organizational drivers. I need to be talking to my supervisor and leadership above me. And then I also need to hold myself accountable with leadership and supervision, and the quality of the competency drivers. Again, that daily, weekly, monthly conversation, focus on real and relevant problems of practice. You know, what we find is that the program-based administrator or supervisor is like a practitioner. They're either enabled or inhibited in providing the same, you know, if they've got a pretty junky enabling context provided to them from above them, right? They're going to have a harder time providing healthy, robust enabling context to their practitioners. So really want to emphasize that this research is showing the parallel process up and down, as well as, you know, horizontally.
Absolutely. Okay. Give you just another minute to chat or put something in the Q&A. It's been a great discussion in the chat. I'm really impressed by the engagement.
And I also just want to make sure I share our next slide resources.
Yes.
So when you get the slide deck, you'll be able to kind of highlight some of the research or some of the information that we were able to speak to today. And then the last page of our presentation will have our contact information as well. So feel free, maybe a question comes up later on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and just make sure to reach out.
That sounds great, Ariel. Thank you for providing those last 2 slides. And please, as Ariel said, reach out to any of us if you have additional questions or would like to continue the dialogue. We'd be happy to.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kelly, Deborah, and Ariel for your time. Before we wrap up, I just want to make a few announcements since I've seen a few questions in the chat and just want to ease everybody's minds about where to find all these different items. Just as a reminder, first and foremost, this session was recorded and will be made available for on-demand consumption next week. You will find a copy of the recording up on our YouTube channel, which can be accessed by going to our website, which I believe I shared the link throughout the session in the chat box. If you still can't find it, just send us an email here at the association, and I'm happy to point out exactly where the recording will be sitting at. A follow-up email will go out in the next hour or so to all the participants in the session containing a certificate of participation. I know that was one of the questions that participants had, is how do we get a certificate? Don't worry, an email will go out to you in about the next hour or so with an attachment that will be your certificate of participation for the 2 hours you spent with us today. Once again, I want to thank our presenters today, Kelly Whitlock, Deborah Pacquiano, and Ariel Chaitis for their time, knowledge in a very informative presentation. The PowerPoint slides will be available up on our website for downloading and printing. So if you have any further questions about the content, feel free to contact us here, and I'll send over the questions to Kelly, Deborah, or Ariel for a response. Once again, thanks everybody for your time, and I hope you have a great rest of your week. Thanks everybody.
Thank you.